What's going on, YouTube? Today we're going to run through a crash course on emulation. Now this is for beginners that really want to test the waters of emulation, so we will not be going into specific emulators as much as the experts in emulation know. Today will be a short, to-the-point video of how to get into emulation. I don't want to waste your time, so let's go ahead and get right into it. When we're talking about emulation, we are referring to the use of an application program, an emulator, in quotations, that can mimic/imitate the behavior of another system or program. We could take this Game Boy Pocket, for instance. This is the original hardware. We have an original cartridge in here. We have Tetris. And as you could tell, as we boot this up, there you go. And as you can tell, as we boot this up, this is playing the original hardware and the original cartridge. What we can do is we can mimic/imitate this specific system onto a retro handheld. And what we're doing is we can enhance that specific experience. So now we don't have very, very dark coloring on the screen. As you can tell, it is a beautiful screen. And we can see here that we have different kind of glossy buttons. We have different devices that can do specific things. Like, for instance, this is a vertical handheld. We have a horizontal handheld here as well. Now, it is fun to play on original hardware. I mean, as you can tell, we can play on one system with one specific cartridge. But to carry around this stuff at all times, like back in the day, you remember, it was daunting to carry around 10 plus games with you when you're going on a road trip, or you're going through like a line at Target, for instance. When you're a kid or something like that, you always pulled out your Game Boy or something along those lines. What's cool about switching to like modern hardware is not only do we not have to carry around cartridges or original hardware that unfortunately is lacking in performance, we can pick up a piece of modern hardware and be able to play thousands, if not more than thousands, of games specifically towards the system's CPU performance. Now, we don't have to worry about getting into CPU performance and everything like that in this video, because we are going to do this as a series. If I told you that you can play multiple systems, depending on the space of this little small, I'm not going to pull it out because it's currently playing, but this little small micro SD card, we can have 64 gigs to 256 gigs to 1 terabyte. If you're throwing it into a Steam Deck, you've probably heard of those before. So basically, depending on how big that micro SD card is how many games/systems you can put on to one little handheld and be able to play thousands and thousands of games. And that's where emulation, I feel, is king compared to original hardware. Now, when people talk about ROMs, they're referring to the game. So for instance, a ROM is a file that contains the data of a single game cartridge. So think of it as Yoshi's Island on a Game Boy Advance cartridge. Now, instead of it being hardware, it's now software. And we can download it and put it into a specific retro handheld, whichever one that you want. So for instance, this is Kid Dracula on my screen right now. Loving this game right now. I never played it as a kid, but I am loving every minute of this game. So definitely recommend if you haven't played it. But yes, think of it as, instead of it being original hardware, we're thinking of it as a file. It's usually named, like, for instance, this is a Game Boy cartridge, so it's Pokemon Red.GB. If it's a GBA game, it's Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3.GBA. Also, some weird ones out there like PS2 games are .ISO. Just think of that when it comes to a ROM. When you hear this term, it means the game. Now, What is a BIOS? You hear this probably sometimes when it comes to computer hardware. A BIOS for a specific system, for instance, Game Boy, that is the boot up, or for instance, how you load a game when it comes to these retro handhelds. So if you're thinking, well, where do I get these BIOS? Where do I get these ROMs? Let's just say I can't really go any further than just Google it. Just say, for instance, Tetris ROM. Instead of Tetris game, say Tetris ROM. And what that does is you can Google it and you're going to find multiple different websites that are allowing you to download these games. When it comes to BIOS, BIOS is a little bit different. When it comes to this, you're going to find these on specific websites as well, and they are very important and very key to certain systems. So for instance, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, all of these, they need a BIOS. They need a boot up to be able to load into these games. Now, you're saying, what is a boot up? A boot up is basically like when you see the Nintendo logo dropping from top to bottom on your screen, like in the original hardware of a Game Boy, for instance. You're seeing that specifically. Oops, well, there is no game in there, but you will see the Nintendo logo drop, right? Now, when it comes to these boot up logos and stuff like that, yes, that is your BIOS. For PS1 and PS2 and like GameCube and Dreamcast, these are all games that actually need a BIOS. Now, there are exceptions. Like if you want, you don't really need to have a GB, a GBC, a GBA, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. You don't need BIOS for these, but I like to include them in my BIOS folder for this specific system, so I have that little bit of a nostalgia kick. I see the Nintendo logo drop from top to bottom when I'm playing Tetris or I'm playing Yoshi's Island or Pokemon or something like that. So these BIOS files, they're important for some systems, but they're also exceptions for others. All right, so why is emulation so interesting? Why have I dedicated an entire YouTube channel to this? So let's go over these 4 or 5 things that I have that I think make emulation just so much better than original hardware. So let's get started. You're able to play so many classics, so many, depending on basically the CPU chip that are in these, you're able to play, like for instance, this one here, so small, form factor is amazing, horizontal handheld, it's able to play up to PSP games. This one here, this one is able to play up to N64 games. Very, very smoothly too. With this analog stick, it is amazing, but that's for another video. Let's get back to this. And the Mia Mini Plus, this one can play all the way up to PS1 flawlessly and play a dash of Nintendo DS in there as well, depending on if you like the form factor and the screen factor, basically. That is one reason why I feel like emulation is so interesting. Number 2, you're able to have save states. So think about this back in the day. You're playing Super Mario 3. Your mom tells you, hey, you got to clean your room. You got to come down for dinner. You know the whole thing. And you didn't get to the end of the world, the stage, the level. So basically, you got to completely cut out all of your experience that you just finished doing, working so hard on, and you have no save state. So basically, you're just sitting here with your hands tied. Oh man, I should probably save this. Well, I can't. Now, these devices provide firmware or software that is able to create save states. Now, save states are basically a way that you're able to run through an entire game. You can cut it in the middle, like for instance, Celeste is on the screen. Like if you're in the middle of a jump, you're able to save state. If you're in the middle of trying to just get through a hard platform level of this and you're like, man, well, I can't get to it, and unfortunately this game really doesn't save itself until you get to the next level, right? So basically you can save state inside of the device's software, and then you can come back and load that save state later on down the road, which is so cool. It's very, very convenient, very accessible, and you're able to use it for the next play session, basically. So I feel like that is another reason why emulation is king, is because of save states. Number 3 is having cheats, in quotations, cheats, with certain emulators. Now, I don't mean to add cheats to break the game, okay? So I'm not trying to get infinite lives in Legend of Zelda, or I'm not able to, or like have unlimited hearts or something along those lines. What I'm trying to say is that you're able to provide an enhanced experience to these games. If you're finding this helpful, please consider commenting, and subscribing to the channel, as this will help out tremendously. Thank you. Now on to number 4. All right. Now number 4 is screen filters. So screen filters, think of it as this. You can see here we have a beautiful screen for Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past and Four Swords, which, let's just be real, when they put both of these games on the same cartridge, that blew my mind. You can see here I have the game switcher up on the Miu Mini Plus, and this is one of the best features I think a device has ever had. This is custom firmware called Onion OS, and we can get into that, of course, down the road in this selection of videos. But what I'm trying to say is we have a specific game up. We can scroll into more and more and more of our recent games, they call it. So we're getting into, for instance, like let's just say I'm going into Kid Dracula. Like Kid Dracula, this is a Game Boy game, okay? So playing on original hardware is very daunting. It's not very fun anymore because you don't have a great looking screen. So what you can do to make it authentic almost is you can create a screen filter. This used to be just a regular like black and white, and I created the screen filter inside of RetroArch to be able to provide a green hue to the screen, basically giving me that nostalgic kick that I need that makes me love this game even more playing on modern hardware. Now, the 5th thing, and the main reason why I love emulation gaming so much compared to the original hardware, we can play these specific games. This is a Game Boy Advance game that is being played on an emulation device and being able to be enhanced. The screen is enhanced, everything is enhanced, the controls are enhanced. Everything that you can think of is better when it comes to emulation devices. Now, let's say a caveat real quick. There are multiple emulation handhelds out there right now that are just, let's just be blunt, they're garbage. So you gotta weed through the nasty ones, and that's why I'd suggest following this channel, following other retro gaming channels on YouTube for resources to find the best retro handhelds to play your original hardware. Now, this is just scratching the surface of emulation and why this hobby is so fun and interesting to me, at least. If you think you would want to try out emulation, then please subscribe to the YouTube channel, as I will be providing a collection of videos explaining the basics of emulation gaming and how to get started. If you found this helpful, please consider liking the video and dropping a comment below. I would love to hear about if you have dove into emulation or are just getting started, and what games you are looking forward to playing. This will help out the channel tremendously, as we are trying to reach and teach more gamers about emulation and how to keep retro gaming going strong. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.